Wow. This is a lot. You've sent us down a real rabbit hole.
Yeah.
With all this stuff about Chris Butler.
Right.
So many different names, too.
Yeah, Jagad Guru and then Siddhaswarabananda Paramahamsa.
It's kind of hard to keep track.
Yeah.
And then all these organizations.
Definitely.
We've got like book excerpts and articles, forum discussions, even social media posts. It's like a puzzle.
It is a lot to piece together.
And it seems like a pretty controversial picture emerging.
Well, it's certainly more than just a simple biography, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at claims of like cult activity and political influence.
Yeah.
And then there's the possible financial misconduct too.
Right. So much to unpack.
Yeah, we have to approach this carefully.
Oh, for sure.
With an open mind, but also like a healthy dose of skepticism.
Totally agreed.
Uh-huh.
So, okay, let's start with the basics. Who exactly is this Chris Butler?
Well, the sources paint him as the founder of the Science of Identity Foundation,
Okay.
or CEF, back in 1977.
Gotcha.
And here's a fascinating tidbit. His own father, a doctor, allegedly labeled him
Wow.
a narcissistic psychopath.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty serious claim.
It is. It makes you think about the man
Yeah.
behind the whole spiritual leader image.
Right.
And this tension between like his public persona
Right.
and these darker accusations seems to run throughout the sources.
Yeah. Okay, so give me an example.
Well, he was initially a student of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada,
Okay.
a really prominent figure in the Hare Krishna movement.
I've heard of him.
But then Butler breaks away
Oh.
to form CIF, his own organization.
Interesting. So what's this SIF all about?
On the surface, they present themselves as this meditation-based group
Okay.
rooted in Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
So that's a form of Hinduism, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So, it sounds peaceful, spiritual at first glance, but then
Okay.
you have these accounts from former members alleging all these manipulative practices, some even calling it a cult.
That's a pretty stark contrast.
It is a jarring disconnect, for sure.
Okay, so speaking of contradictions,
Yeah.
SIF really emphasizes this idea of taking refuge in the Vaishnava community.
Right.
Sounds harmless enough, right?
On the surface, maybe,
Right.
but one of the sources suggests this concept might be used to create a sense of dependency on the group.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that something you see
Both there.
in other groups with similar allegations?
It's a common tactic.
Oh, okay.
The idea of surrendering to a community or a leader,
Right.
it can be twisted, to discourage critical thinking and enforce obedience.
So like a control thing.
Exactly. A classic power move.
Okay, so taking refuge might not be as
Not always.
benign as it sounds.
Right.
And then there are these allegations about SIF influencing political campaigns
Yeah.
and receiving all these donations from members.
Yeah.
And then we have Tulsi Gabbard,
Right.
former U.S. representative and presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Her family has deep ties to SIF.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, Gabbard's connection to CIF has attracted a lot of attention, especially during her political career.
I can see why.
Some sources allege that CIF might have had significant influence over her campaigns,
Okay,
both ideologically and financially.
gotcha.
There's this one example that really stands out.
Oh, yeah.
Eduardo Tamayo Gabbard's ex-husband.
Okay.
He was a CIF member and worked at their Ninja Gang.
Ninja Gang.
And he made these substantial political contributions to both Tulsi and her father.
So it's a much bigger web than just a spiritual group then.
It seems that way. It stretches into politics.
Right.
And possibly even finance with this connection to QNet.
This multi-level marketing company.
Yeah, this one takes us in a much darker direction.
Okay, how so?
Well, one of QNet's founders, Joseph Bismarck,
Okay.
also known as Japa Das,
Another name.
right, he openly identifies as a student of Chris Butler.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty significant link.
It is.
And QNet itself seems to be wrapped up in some seriously disturbing allegations.
You're not kidding. We're talking pyramid scheme accusations,
What?
financial fraud, and even murder.
Murder.
One source mentions the arrest of 4 QNet representatives in Indonesia
Oh, my God.
for the murder of a go-kart driver.
That's intense.
Yeah.
How does a group
I know, it's a wild situation.
with ties to a spiritual organization
Right.
get caught up in something that dark?
It's a jarring contrast.
Yeah,
Raises serious questions about the nature of CIF's involvement with QNet.
for sure.
Yeah.
Are these just isolated incidents?
Right.
Or is there something more going on here?
That's what we need to figure out.
And then there's the financial side of SIF itself.
Yeah.
These accusations that Chris Butler pressured followers for donations,
Mm-hmm.
controlled their finances. Even
Right.
it all seems pretty hypocritical,
It does.
considering he's promoting these principles of renunciation.
Yeah, but allegedly accumulating wealth himself.
And then there's the suspicion surrounding the sale of those
Yeah.
IYT Czaitanii properties in Poland.
Right, and the lack of transparency about where those funds went.
Right, so many layers of questionable financial dealings here.
It's definitely concerning.
So we've got this potentially manipulative group
Yeah.
with alleged political influence and ties to a company facing serious accusations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all supposedly based on Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Right.
It seems like SIF is presenting a very particular and maybe skewed interpretation of this tradition.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Okay.
We have SIF claiming to represent Gaudiya Vaishnavism,
Right.
but we also need to consider the criticism coming from
Now,
more traditional practitioners within this lineage.
they're not on board.
Not exactly. They're questioning Butler's qualifications as a guru
Okay.
and criticizing SIF's practices as deviations from the authentic teachings.
So they see it as harmful.
Potentially.
And a distortion of the core principles.
Exactly. And this leads us to another chapter in Chris Butler's story,
Okay.
his fall from sannyasa.
Okay, tell me more about this fall.
All right, so sannyasa in Hinduism
Yeah.
is the stage of life dedicated to spiritual pursuits.
Okay.
Involves taking vows of renunciation, celibacy included.
Mm.
But Chris Butler abandoned sannyasa
He did.
after marrying Wailana.
Oh, wow, that raised some eyebrows, I bet.
It did, especially among traditional Gaudiya Vaishnavas.
Seems like a pretty clear contradiction.
Yeah, you would think.
So he's not a sannyasi anymore?
Right, but here's the thing.
What's that?
He continues to use the title Paramahamsa,
What do you mean?
traditionally reserved for renounced ascetics.
Oh, so even more controversy.
Definitely, it's drawn a lot of criticism.
I can imagine.
People questioning his legitimacy
Yeah.
and his adherence to the principles he claims to embody.
So even within the tradition
Right.
he claims to represent,
Exactly.
there are serious questions about his actions
Mm-hmm.
and his right to use that title.
It's complicated.
It's getting more and more complicated.
Sure.
And honestly, kind of disturbing
Yeah.
with every layer we uncover.
It's a lot to process.
Where do we even go from here? Feels like we're peeling back the layers of an onion here.
Right.
And each layer reveals more contradictions.
Yeah. And more disturbing information, too.
It's really a lot to process.
It is. But that's what makes this deep dive so important, right?
Yeah.
You've given us all these pieces of the puzzle, and we're trying to help you assemble a clearer picture.
Okay.
The key is to step back from the individual details
Right?
and look at the larger implications.
Look, what does it all mean?
Right? What are the big takeaways?
Yeah.
Well, for starters, Chris Butler's life and teachings
Yeah.
seem full of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
He presents himself as this spiritual leader.
Right.
But then there are all these allegations
Yeah.
of hypocrisy and manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
even potential criminal activity connected to him and the organizations he influences.
Right. It makes you question how we evaluate these
kinda-
spiritual leaders and groups.
It's crucial.
You know, it makes me think about that source we have on trauma and cults.
Uh,
It talks about how some leaders exploit people's vulnerability, their desire for belonging,
Right.
and then they use these specific techniques to suppress critical thinking
Oh, yeah.
and even project their own shame onto their followers.
It's a disturbing thought for sure.
It really is. And while these are just allegations,
You're
the sheer volume and consistency of these claims
Mhm.
coming from all these different sources,
right.
it can't be ignored.
It demands careful consideration.
Yeah. What stood out to you from all this information?
Honestly, it's the human element that gets to me.
Oh, yeah.
You see these lists of alleged ASIF members,
Yeah. Hundreds of names.
real people with families and lives.
It's easy to forget that.
Then you have the former members speaking out,
Right.
sharing their experiences, often at great personal cost.
Those stories are powerful.
They are.
They highlight the real-world consequences of these allegations.
You're right. Those individual stories are so important.
Yeah.
They give a human face to these complex issues.
Totally. Like take Balaram Prabhu, for example.
Oh, yeah.
He grew up in South,
Right.
but chose not to follow Butler as his guru.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, he was ostracized by his own family,
Wow.
shunned by the community he knew.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. It's a stark reminder of the potential for harm
Yeah.
when group loyalty overrides individual choice and compassion.
It's a tough lesson.
And then there's the financial aspect, too.
Right.
It's one thing to promote spiritual principles of renunciation,
Yeah.
But these allegations of Butler accumulating wealth
Mm-hmm.
while pressuring followers for donations
Mm-hmm.
and that lack of transparency around SIF's finances.
Yeah, it raises serious ethical questions.
It does, especially when you consider the claims against QNet,
Right.
that alleged pyramid scheme with the potential for financial exploitation.
Exactly. The financial aspect adds another layer of complexity.
For sure.
We need to consider the claims against Qet, the accusations regarding Butler's own financial dealings, and then this lack of transparency around SIF's finances.
It's all very concerning.
It paints a troubling picture.
So we've been going back and forth
Yeah.
about potential cult dynamics.
Right.
One source, this excerpt from Keeping Faith with Katuri,
Okay.
talks about taking refuge in the Vaishnava community.
Right.
It even states that this involves taking initiation.
Interesting.
Could this be interpreted as creating a sense of dependency on the group?
But that's certainly a valid interpretation,
But-
and it aligns with patterns we see in other controversial groups.
Okay, give me some examples.
Well, the emphasis on subjective feeling states,
Okay.
the pressure to ignore doubts,
Mm-hmm.
the potential isolation from outside influences.
Right.
These are all tactics that can be used to control members
Uh-huh.
and suppress dissenting voices.
But how do you know when a spiritual group crosses the line?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah. What are some signs that someone might be involved in something harmful?
Well, there are no easy answers.
Right.
But some red flags to watch out for.
Okay.
Leadership that discourages critical thinking or questioning.
Okay.
A focus on absolute obedience to the leader.
Gotcha.
Isolation from family and friends outside the group.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, financial pressure or exploitation.
So important for people to be aware of these red flags.
Absolutely.
Especially today with so much information out there
Mm-hmm.
and so many different groups vying for attention. It can be really hard to discern what's authentic
Right.
and what's potentially dangerous.
You're absolutely right. That's where critical thinking comes in.
Yeah.
We can't blindly accept everything we're told.
Yep.
We need to question research and consider different perspectives.
Right.
And crucially, we need to listen to the experiences of those who have been harmed,
Yeah.
even if those experiences challenge our existing beliefs.
Which brings us back to the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition itself.
Yeah,
It's fascinating how this deep dive has revealed such a range
it is.
of interpretations and practices within a single tradition.
That's the beauty and the challenge of religious traditions.
How so?
Well, they evolve, they adapt,
Mhm.
and they're interpreted differently by different groups and individuals.
Right.
But this also creates the potential for misrepresentation and exploitation.
And that's what we're seeing with SIF.
Exactly.
They claim to represent Gaudiya Vaishnavism,
Right.
but traditional practitioners are criticizing Butler and his organization.
Yeah, for deviating from the authentic teachings.
Their concerns go beyond just doctrinal differences, though, right?
Absolutely. They're questioning Butler's qualifications as a guru
Yeah.
and pointing to his controversial decision to abandon sannyasa
Uh-huh.
while still clinging to the title and image of a renunciate.
It's like he wants to have it both ways.
It seems that way,
And if we connect that back to those allegations of hypocrisy
right?
regarding his wealth and lifestyle,
Uh-huh.
it paints a pretty unflattering picture.
It does. It underscores the need to look beyond charisma
Yeah.
and superficial claims of spiritual authority.
So what should we be looking for?
We need to scrutinize people's actions,
Okay.
their consistency, and how they treat others.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
This deep dive has been like an intense crash course
I know, right?
in Chris Butler's Sif Qent
Mm-hmm.
and the world of Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Definitely eye-opening.
It has been to see how all these pieces fit together,
Yeah.
even if the overall picture isn't pretty.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
So it's essential to emphasize the importance of critical thinking.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to spiritual matters.
We can't just rely on charisma or emotional appeals.
Nope.
We have to engage our minds, ask tough questions,
Right.
and be willing to look beyond the surface.
That's how we protect ourselves and others
Yeah.
from potentially harmful situations.
Man, what a journey this has been.
Right.
We started with this pile of sources
Yeah.
and ended up uncovering all this disturbing information
There's a lot to absorb.
about Chris Butler and the organizations he's involved with.
But this deep dive has also sparked a crucial conversation about how we approach spiritual seeking
Right.
and how to tell the difference between authentic teachings and potentially harmful practices.
That's so important. So what if someone's listening to this and thinking, wait a minute, some of this sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Maybe they're questioning their own involvement in a group.
Right.
What advice would you give them?
Well, first of all, I'd say you're not alone.
Okay.
There are resources available,
My God.
people who understand and can help.
So what should they do?
Start by reaching out to a trusted friend or family member,
Okay.
or connect with an organization that specializes in cult recovery.
It can be hard to take that first step,
Oh, absolutely.
especially when you've been so involved in a group.
For sure. But remember, it's okay to question.
Yeah.
It's okay to doubt.
Right.
And it's okay to leave.
You have to put your safety and well-being first.
Exactly.
We hear these stories about people getting caught up in these groups, and it's easy to judge from the outside.
Right.
But anyone can be vulnerable,
Absolutely.
especially if they're going through a tough time
Yeah.
or searching for meaning and connection.
You're so right. And that's why it's crucial to have these conversations, to
Yeah.
raise awareness and empower people with the knowledge and tools to protect themselves.
This deep dive has been a real roller coaster.
It has.
Fascinating, disturbing, but ultimately, I think, empowering.
I agree.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to be discerning,
Yes.
to ask questions,
Right.
and to hold those in positions of power accountable.
Couldn't agree more. And remember, this is just a starting point.
Yeah.
You've given us some incredible sources, but there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
Thanks for having me.
And I encourage you to continue your own exploration.
Yes, keep learning.
Research, ask questions, and form your own conclusions.
Don't be afraid to think critically.
Keep those minds sharp, those hearts open, and never stop questioning.
Well said.
Until next time.